Hey everyone, Anthony Reardon here with West Plains Extension. Today I'm here to talk to you about honeybees because honeybees are an integral part of our ecosystems. I am the horticulture agent here, which means my responsibility is plants, and a lot of plants really couldn't even exist without honeybees. Honeybees not only pollinate flowers, but they pollinate crops, which means a lot of the foods that you eat wouldn't exist without honeybees either. Honeybees are incredibly intelligent. They can talk to each other in multiple ways. So let's dive on in and see what we can learn about them. When you are exploring the outdoors, chasing your dog, climbing a tree, strolling through the flowers, what is your first thought when you come across a bee? If it's to squish it, then you, my friend, are listening to the right presentation, because I am here today to change your mind. Those flowers that you're strolling through, a lot of them are there because a bee took the time to visit them last year, and they pollinated them when doing so. Bees are covered in tiny hairs that are specially adapted for collecting pollen, because the bee itself needs pollen as its food source. As a result of bees going from flower to flower collecting pollen, pollen from different plants is being moved around, dropping from bees onto new plants. Ultimately, this results in flowers making seeds in a process called pollination. Eventually, those seeds on that flower are going to drop to the ground. Time and weather cooperating, they'll get covered in some soil, maybe a squirrel buries them, and then they wait to get watered, which typically isn't very hard being that they're outdoors. Then it's time for those seeds to grow, resulting in even more flowers for that bee to go and pollinate. A single honeybee can visit up to 5,000 flowers in a single day, traveling up to 3 miles away from its hive. That is a lot of flowers, and what's even crazier, a honeybee hive has to go to 1 million flowers just to make a single pound of honey, and they make a lot of honey. One hive needs up to 150 pounds of honey in a warm season, just for its food. Then they need another 80 pounds on top of that just to get through the winter. That is 230 pounds of honey just for them. The average adult man weighs less than that. And what's crazier, that isn't even close to how much honey the hive makes. A single honeybee hive will produce up to 400 pounds of honey in a year. If you're doing the math with me, that's 400 million flowers that they have to pollinate in 1 year to make that. So where are all of these flowers? Your parents might have a nice garden in their backyard, but probably not with 400 million plants in it. The answer to this is simple. In the bee world, there is no such thing as a weed. As long as the plant produces a flower, it is fair game to go and be pollinated. That means that every dandelion, every sprig of henbit that you see in the spring, all of the mustard, all of the clover, the alfalfa, the asters, they all get stopped by and pollinated. This is how honeybees produce so much honey, and this is also why we pay so much attention to honeybees. Not only do they make food on their own, honey, but they help us grow our food. It's not just garden flowers that honeybees pollinate, crop flowers are pollinated too. It's thought that nearly 1/3 of all the crops produced in the world need pollinators in order to grow. Several crops, especially fruits, couldn't even exist if it weren't for honeybees pollinating them. It is for these reasons that mankind has taken it upon itself to have their own beehives. The stacked kind that most people are familiar with, they're known as Langstroth hives. Farmers and vegetable producers place these hives near their operations because they know the bees will help them churn out a crop. With the bees next to the plants, the crops are their closest source for pollen, so they pollinate them. And then it's a win-win. The bees get fed, and so do we. And we get some honey out of the deal. But just how are the bees so efficient in getting to these crops? How do they even know where to go? Honeybees are very intelligent communicators. As a forager bee goes out and discovers a food source, it will return to its hive and do what is known as a figure 8 dance. This dance tells the other bees what angle and direction from the hive they need to fly to find food. And dancing isn't the only way that bees communicate. Much of their talking is done through chemical messages put off by their bodies. These messages can be anything from leaving a trail for other bees to follow, to sounding an alarm for other bees to attack. If you ever watch a beekeeper, one of the first things they'll do when maintaining their hive is use a tool called a smoker on it. The purpose of this tool is to obstruct the chemical communication between the bees by masking those chemicals in smoke. Because the chemicals are masked, any attack messages being sent out are undetectable to the other bees. Additionally, the smoke then tells the bees that a fire could be nearby, so rather than taking flight and potentially going into the flames, they stay in place. Think of it like turning a house alarm off before going inside. And we have a lot of reason to go inside. We like that honey as much as the bees do, and we find ways to get that honey. When extracting honey, a beekeeper will remove the shorter boxes from the top of a hive stack. These are the boxes that are typically only occupied by worker bees, where the queen and her drones will be in the larger boxes on the bottom. so it's a safe way to get some honey out without actually bothering the hive too much or putting the queen in danger. When those stacks are removed, the beekeeper will take the time to pry each form of honeycomb from the box. From there, they'll take a special metal comb to the honeycomb and remove any wax covering the cells, and then the forms go into what is called a centrifuge, a machine that spins. It spins so much, in fact, that the honey inside the honeycomb is pulled out of it by gravity. From there, the honey is simply splattered against the wall of the tank, and when it drips down, it piles in the bottom. And that's how we get honey. Now, the honey you buy in stores has probably been cleaned up and sterilized a bit, but the process is the same. It's estimated that nearly every person consumes around 1.7 pounds of honey in a year. And that amount is increasing. Think you never eat honey and that can't be true? How often do you eat sweets? Do you like cereal, granola bars, cake, pastries? Manufactured food companies love to put sweeteners in their goods, so even if you don't think you're eating honey, you more than likely are at times, if what you're eating has a natural sweet taste. And it all comes back to the honeybee. Without honeybees, so many of the aspects of life that we take for granted would no longer exist. Picture your cereal tasting like fake chemical sugar instead of naturally sweet. Picture your grandma's flower garden not blooming because it hasn't been adequately pollinated. Picture having no fruit available, or having to pay a lot more money for your clothes because the cotton supply is down. Unfortunately, this could be a reality that we face in the future if we don't take active steps to protect honeybees. In recent years, honeybees have been facing a plague known as colony collapse disorder, where they fly away from their hives and then for some reason they can't find their way back to them. A lot of research has been showing that this is due to the application of certain pesticides that we're using on crops, which is where the responsibility comes back to you. It is so fundamentally important in farming to use your chemicals responsibly and know how they interact with the environment. When applying for a pesticide license, the cardinal rule is read your labels. And please do so, as there are so many great foods that heavily rely on honeybees. Imagine if apples were suddenly hard to come by, or they cost $3 each. Imagine a summer without cucumbers to cool you down in the heat. Avocados are already pricey. Imagine how much extra that guac is going to be if they're in short supply. Even your less thought about fruits like pears, starfruit, or even mango, they rely heavily on honeybee pollination. What if it was hard to find peaches anymore? Or cashews? Or almonds? Imagine making your salsas without cilantro, or cherry pies not being available anymore. Most berries would be hard to find without honeybees. Picture very little raspberries, or blackberries, or blueberries. The food chain needs its pollinators. Which brings me to my final segment of this presentation I have aptly titled, Foods That Will No Longer Exist Without Honeybees, because they're dead. Kiwi, macadamia nut, passion fruit, Brazil nut, zucchini, pumpkins, all gourds in general, cantaloupe, watermelon, and don't even get me started on seeds. Even if the pollination of honeybees doesn't directly result in the plants making fruit, there's so many plants that rely on their pollination to create seeds. Onions, celery, and carrots are to name a few, and there are so many more. Even the crops that we don't grow for eating would be affected. Honeybee pollination makes yields in cotton fields go up. With more cotton, it doesn't cost as much to make clothes, and your clothes are therefore cheaper. And it all comes back to that one little bee. One of them getting squished probably isn't going to bring about the end of avocado toast and pumpkin pie as we know them, but we shouldn't look at honeybees as creatures to be hated. They do so much for us without us ever even really thinking about them. So, next time you happen to fly across one in your garden, leave it be, get it, and off it will go to pollinate for you. Until next time, I am Anthony Reardon with the West Plains Extension District, and you have a wonderful day.